I want to just summarize real quick who Hosea is and what where we've gotten to. And we actually got to chapter 3, and I want to stop and go back and look at chapter 3 because I don't think I did it justice last time. I was up here, and it's only 5 verses, but there's a lot packed in those 5 verses. It has a lot of meaning for us. And then we'll try to get through chapter 4. I actually am prepared for 4 and 5, but I hope to at least get through chapter 4 today. But again, I want to circle back to chapter 3, and that's where we'll start in a minute. But just to summarize, Hosea is a prophet of God sent to the northern kingdom of Israel. It's the time of the split kingdom. You have 10 tribes that form the northern kingdom, and you have 2 tribes that form the southern kingdom, different kings. At this time, at the time that Hosea is sent in the northern kingdom, the king is Jeroboam the second. So the whole time Hosea is there, it's Jeroboam. And then in Judah, which is the southern kingdom, two of the tribes, it actually has 4 kings during this time. So those are Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. And if you study out those kings, some are considered good kings, and some are considered bad kings. The other thing about Hosea's time is Israel and Judah are both very prosperous. They're in times of great prosperity for them. So, the people are doing well. There's plentiful food. There's plentiful riches. Both kingdoms are blessed. But it's also a time of religious adultery, and that's really what the story of Hosea in the first couple chapters around, is they're not worshiping God in the way that they should. Doesn't mean no one there is worshiping God, but as a nation, as a people, as God's chosen people, they're not worshiping God, they're worshiping idols, they're worshiping other gods, little g gods out there. But they're still prosperous, right? And one thing for us to keep in mind is that those times of when God has blessed us and we're in a time of prosperity in our lives, those are the easiest times for us to forget about God, right? And if you think about the Hebrew people, they're really prosperous and they're not thanking God for it. So God sent Hosea to Israel, and at the same time, he sent another prophet to Judah, but he sent Hosea to Israel, and in the first couple of chapters, we see God uses Hosea's life, his marriage, as an example of Israel's relationship with God. Okay? So we know that God told Hosea to go marry a woman named Gomer, and he told her she's going to be an unfaithful wife. Right? Hosea did what he did. Gomer was an unfaithful wife. She bare him 3 children. She bare him Jezreel, the son, his first son, and the Bible says his son, who Jezreel, if you study out that in the Bible, has a lot of meaning for Israel. Ultimately, the valley of Jezreel was in the valley of Megiddo, where the final battle will take place, the last battle in Revelation. But Jezreel is a place of importance or meaning within Israel throughout its history, both in the past and in the future. He had a daughter who was named Ruhamah. And remember that word lo on the front means no or not. And the name Ruhamah means people, my people. So he had a daughter that was not my people. That's what her name stood for. And God was basically saying, okay, you have an adulterous wife, and you have a child that is not my people, or not his people. If you read the Bible, if you read chapter 1, it refers to Jezreel as his son. If you read about Ruhamah, it doesn't refer to her as his daughter. It just says Gomer conceived and had a daughter. Now, whether it's his or not, I don't know, but there's importance in the words of the Bible, right? So, if you think about it, Ruhamah is not his daughter. And we talked about God using Hosea's life to reflect his relationship with Israel. Israel is not his people at this time. right? They are not serving him. And then he had a third son, Lo-Ami. I may have those backwards, actually. But he had a third son, or had a second son, a third child, that was no mercy, no grace, no peace, right? So if you reading through the first couple of chapters, we see God uses Hosea's life and his relationship with Gomer to outline his own relationship with his people, with Israel. And you can look at it this way: Hosea is the prophet, and God put Hosea through this, so Hosea knew how God was feeling, right? And then, so chapter 1, he had these 3 children: Jezreel, Lo-Ruhamah, and Lo-Ami. And in chapter 2, we find out that Gomer is in the life of adultery. And as you read through it, it reflects in Gomer's life what happened there was God punished her. She lost the prosperity that she had. So she gained things from from her affairs, but she lost them. God took them away. God took the gifts and the treasures, or whatever she gained from that. And it says he basically made it like a desert. And we find out as we get into chapter 3, and we're about to read there, she's actually in bondage. She's a slave. She's been enslaved or sold. She's owned by someone. And as we read chapter 3, we'll see that. So I'm going to read chapter 3 real quick. We'll start there. I want to kind of go through it verse by verse of what I see there. And then we'll jump into chapter 4 and try to see if we can get through that. So chapter 3, verse 1 of Hosea. Then said the Lord unto me, Go yet, love a woman beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress, according to the love of the Lord toward the children of Israel, who look to other gods and love flagons of wine. So I bought her to me for 15 pieces of silver, and for a homer of barley, and half a homer of barley. And I said unto her, Thou shalt buy for me many days, thou shalt not play the harlot, and thou shalt not be for another man, so will I also be for thee. For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king, and without a prince, and without a sacrifice, and without an image, and without an ephod, and without a teraphim. Afterward shall the children of Israel return, and seek the Lord their God, and David their king, and shall fear the Lord in his goodness in the latter days. Stay and pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your gift of salvation. I thank you for your word, Lord, and just the history, the lessons, the things that you want us to know, and the examples of how you want us to live, Lord. Lord, I just thank you for the freedom to study your word and just to get closer to you in that relationship, Lord. I'm thankful you want that relationship with us. Lord, I thank you for this church. I thank you for those who are here today, Lord. I pray that you just bless the Sunday school hours with the kids, the teens, and the adult class here, Lord. I pray that you be with the teachers. Lord, I pray that you be with me as I just continue to share the study of Hosea, Lord, and just don't let me trip up on your words, Lord, or confuse things, Lord. I just pray that you just help me to share some lessons from this text. Lord, I pray that you be with those who aren't here today, whether they're sick or traveling, Lord. I pray that you be with the services that follow in your Son's name. So chapter 3 of Hosea, a very small chapter, 5 verses. But and I studied this for last week, or the last time I taught, and I kind of went through it, blew through it. I didn't go in depth to it. So I've been reading it over and over again. And there is a ton packed into these 5 verses. It's actually a pretty amazing verse, because you look at it in the first 3 verses, again, are focused on Hosea and his relationship to Gomer. So let's just start at the first verse. Then said the Lord unto me, Go yet, love a woman beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress. So the Lord is talking to Hosea, and he says, Go find Gomer and love her. Go find Gomer and love her, regardless of the fact that she's an adulteress. And when it says they're loved of her friend, that tripped me up for a little bit. But that's describing the fact that she has other lovers in her life. Those are the Gomer's adultery had many different people out there, and they loved her, and they gave her things. But as we know from chapter 2, her life has been turned upside down. And we see here God telling them, go love a woman. Go love your wife. Go find your wife and love her. And he says, according to the love of the Lord toward the children of Israel, who took to other gods, who looked to other gods and loved flagons of wine. You go love your wife regardless of what she's done, just as I, the God of Israel, love my people, regardless of what they've done. Okay? Israel at this time is not looking toward God. They're serving other gods. They're serving idols. They're not giving God thanks for their prosperity. They're thanking other gods. They're looking other ways. As some of them are probably looking at themselves. You know, the whole thing is, we hear it a lot today, is I made this, I built this, right? That's really the attitude Israel had, is God didn't do this, my hands did this. And he's saying here, Hosea, I want you to go love your wife as an example of how I love my people, regardless of them turning from me, regardless of these things they seek and what they do. So we know Hosea goes and does it, because we jump into chapter 2. And this is how we know that Gomer is actually in a life of servitude at this point. And this verse is a wonderful picture of our relationship with Christ, because of Christ. Our relationship with God is pictured in this one verse right here. Now the price is different, but I had to look up the price here. So it says, so I, being Hosea, bought her. He bought her. He paid a price for her. He redeemed her. Okay? To buy something is to redeem it. He went and bought her. He said, so I bought her to make to me for 15 pieces of silver, not a tiny price in those days, 15 pieces of silver, and for a homer of barley, and for a half a homer of barley. And I had to look up what a homer was. I don't know what the measurements are of this, but a homer, and I saw two different definitions. It's 8 or 10 bushels of barley here. So he paid anywhere from 12 to 15 bushels and 15 pieces of silver for Gomer to redeem her, to buy her out of that life of servitude and bring her back with him. Okay. The price that our Lord paid for us to redeem us out of the servitude to sin is so much greater. But there's a picture there, right? God said, go do it. Homer went and did it. Hosea went and did it. He paid the price, and he redeemed his wife. And then we get to verse 3, and this is even more amazing, because again, it's not that just Christ just redeemed us out of the life of sin. When we read verse 3, it says, and I said unto her, Hosea said unto Gomer, thou shalt abide for me many days, and thou shalt not play the harlot, and thou shalt not be for another man, and will I also be for thee. So he didn't just buy her out of servitude and said, that's it. He bought her out of servitude and said, you will be my wife, and I will be your husband. Okay? It's not just a relationship of, okay, you're not a servant to someone else, and it's not the relationship of, I'm not going to love you like I used to. What he says is, our relationship will be what it should have been between a husband and a wife. Right? Hosea didn't just redeem her, he restored her. Okay. And again, think about our relationship with the Lord and through Christ and what he's done. God just didn't redeem us or pay the price for our sin. He's restored our relationship to him, right? We're not just a servant that's set free from sin. We are his children, right? We're not just human beings running around here, and God's paid the price for the life we've had. He's our Father, right? And as a church or as a people, we're the bride of Christ. So the relationship that Hosea had with Gomer from chapter 1 to this point plays out the picture of God's relationship to Israel. And that's not done yet. And that's when we get to these last two verses, I want to talk about that a little bit. But at this time, it's a picture of God's relationship to Israel. They've turned away from him. They've committed religious adultery or spiritual adultery because they've turned to other gods, served other things. They're not thankful for him. They don't acknowledge him and all that. And God's saying Hosea's relationship to Gomer, the fact that she's committed adultery to him, that's what the nation of Israel has done to God. Okay? Then he's punished Gomer in her life, and whatever she gained from the life of adultery, whether it was the gifts, treasure, and all that, that all dried up, and she ends up in a life of servitude. Okay? That's what happens to Israel. That's what God's warning them about here, but we know Assyria comes in and conquers Israel and takes them away. Okay? And whether Hosea was alive at that point or not, Hosea is the prophet that's to them before that happens. Okay? So God's using Hosea's life and says, Hosea, here's your life. This is my relationship with Israel. Here's Gomer. That's who Israel is to me. And he dried it up. She went in servitude. And then this last verse is that promise of that there will be a day where I will redeem my people. I will restore. Now, the Hosea's lessons here and what's happened in his life is geared toward Israel, but it has application to us in our relationship with our Lord. Okay. So we see Gomer's adultery matches Israel's adultery, matches who we were in the life of sin. We see Gomer's falling into that life and how it cost her everything. And we see Israel loses their kingdom when Assyria conquers them. And we see Gomer redeemed from that and restored by Hosea, which is what God will do for Israel and what he has done for us through Christ. Okay. So those first three chapters are the picture of Hosea's life with Gomer and the picture of God's relationship to Israel, and it's got a picture for us of our relationship with Christ. And then we get to these last two chapters. In this one, when we talk about it, some people, if you read commentaries out there, they'll say, okay, this has already occurred because Israel did return from their enslavement in Assyria, from their servitude in Syria. The people came back in the year 70 AD. That's when Israel, as a nation, disappeared from the world until it was restored 1959. Okay. But there is a point here where Israel did come back. They came back and they settled the land again. If you read Jeremiah, you'll read part of that story. You'll see in the Bible that they did come back. And I'm going to read the chapter 4. And it says, "For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king, without a prince, and without a sacrifice, and without an image, and without an ephod, and without a teraphim." That's what happened when they were in Assyria, or when they were conquered later. Ultimately, when Rome ruled them at the time of Jesus, they actually had these things. Okay? But the children of Israel shall abide many days without these. As I was reading that, I was thinking, okay, they went to Assyria and they lost all this, but they all came back at some point, right? And then they got conquered again, and then Israel disappeared. Well, today, from a prophetic vision, Israel exists. But does Israel fulfill any one of these things that are described here today? Does Israel have a king? No. They don't have a prince. They don't have a sacrifice. They don't even have a place to have a sacrifice. They don't have an image. And, when you look at image, ephod, and teraphim, we know ephod, if you studied out the Jewish priests, an ephod is part of the robe or the uniform they wear. But it's also sometimes considered an idol and all that. So I look at it as they don't have the ephod. The image, when you look that word up, it talks about a pillar. Okay, well, they don't have a temple, and maybe I'm making a stretch there, but you look at this describes Israel today. Because one thing it doesn't say here is that it doesn't say they don't have a land. So the way I look at this is, a lot of people look at this and said, oh, well, this has already been fulfilled when they came out of Assyria. Or this has been fulfilled, up until the time they were Rome. So this is a prophecy, but I sit here and I look at it and I say, this is Israel today. Okay? This is Israel today in my mind. Because we know they don't serve God. They're not serving God. That's not to say there's not people there who believe the God of the Hebrews, or the God that they believed in the Old Testament times. They don't believe Christ. There are Jews that are saved, but they're the Jewish. If you're in the Jewish religion and you're not a Christian, you don't believe Christ was the Messiah, right? So there are people there who believe in the God that the Jews believed at this time, but they're not Christian. They don't have their temple, but they do have their land. And then we get to verse 5, and I think this is pointing to the return of the Lord. It says, afterward shall the children of Israel return and seek the Lord their God. And when it says return, the first thought that comes to mind is they return to the land of Israel. Return has another meaning too. It means to turn back. So another way to look at this, afterward shall the children of Israel return to God. There is coming a day where Israel will, as a people, turn back to the God they worship. The God who led them out of Egypt, the God who led them to the promised land, the God who supported them when they went into the promised land, the God who has been with them from the beginning to the time that the temple was destroyed and Israel disappeared as a land in 70 AD, around that time. The God that was with them when their land was restored, 1955, and the God that is still with them today that they're not serving. Right? So verse 5 there, I think is prophetic of that day that Israel, as a nation, as a people, will turn back to God. Okay. So chapter 3, we've gone through the life, from 1 to 3, we've gone through the life of Hosea and Gomer as a real world image. And it is not a parable, it is not a story. This is a real man named Hosea and a real woman named Gomer that really existed. And God put it in here for us to understand what the relationship with Israel was. And the first 3 chapters lay that out. Now we get to chapter 4. And I'm going to kind of work through this with my notes and go through it a few verses at a time. So I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel, for the Lord hath a controversy with the inhabitants of the land. That word controversy means a conflict or a charge. God is being the judge here. God is saying, my people of Israel, I have a charge against you. I'm about to convict you and lay out what you're doing wrong. Okay? So have a controversy with the inhabitants of the land because there is no truth. There is no mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. So first off, you don't know who I am anymore. You don't know my truth. You don't live my truth. You don't have any mercy for anybody around you. Yeah, and as I think about this, so I've had this, my personal philosophy is the biggest sin that leads to every other sin out there is the sin of selfishness, the sin of me. Right? Selfishness is what leads to, well, what pleases me, what pleasures me, what makes me feel good. We see it in our advertising today, right? And some of these are older advertisements, right? The just do it. If it feels good, do it. What makes you happy, right? Those are all selfishness. They're all self-focused. And at this time, when you look at Israel, when people turn from God and put something else before them, the focus is on themselves. Right? So it's God having charge for them, saying, there is no mercy. There's no knowledge of me. There's no truth. You are not living the life that I, as your God, want you to live. Okay? So he's charging them. And then 2, by swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out and blood touches blood. Every one of those is part of the 10 Commandments. By swearing, taking God's name in vain, swearing, right? Lying, thou shalt not lie. Killing, thou shalt not kill. Stealing, thou shalt not steal. Committing adultery. Blood touches blood is violence. This is what's going on in Israel, and God's looking at them, and again, they're in a time of prosperity here, and God says, this is your life. This is what you're living. You have all this sin going on. So prosperity, in times of prosperity, I tried to say it earlier, is in times of prosperity is a time that we lose sight of God. And I think Israel, in their time of prosperity here, they lost sight of God. Right? And it became I did this. I made this. I built this. This is my hands. Never acknowledging the fact that what's guiding those hands is the God. Okay? And then finally in verse 3, therefore shall the land mourn, and everyone that dwelleth therein shall languish with the beasts of the field and the fowls of heaven, yea, the fishes of the sea also shall be taken away. So we get to this point of this is what's going on in the land. You don't know me. All this sin is occurring, and you're about to suffer for it. Their prosperity is about to be wiped away. Here's a nation that is living on the fatness of its prosperity, and we know the Assyrians are about to come in and drag it all away, take it all away. So God has these charges against Israel, and he says, be prepared or beware. Okay? Then we get to verses 4 to 6. So the first one is the nation of Israel as a people. Verses 4 to 6. Yet let no man strive nor reprove another, for thy people are as they that strive with the priest. Therefore shalt thou fall in a day, and the prophet also shall fall with thee in the night, and I will destroy thy mother. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because thou hast rejected knowledge. I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me. Seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God, I will also forget thy children. So the first 3 verses is a charge against the people of Israel. These next 3 verses, as you look through it, it's talking about the priest of Israel. It's talking about the religious leaders of Israel. It's talking about the people who should be sharing the knowledge of God and teaching the people and training the people and helping them understand who God is and what he is to them and who they should serve and who they should worship. And he's saying the priests have failed. Right? If you know the Bible and you know the history of the books, if you study through it, the priests fail often. Right? The priests fail often, and they failed Israel here. They haven't taught them things. They haven't shared with them God's knowledge. They haven't reminded them. So here's Hosea, a prophet. And it doesn't say Hosea was a priest. You know, tradition, which is not biblical, says that Hosea may have been a pottery person. But he had a job. He was a normal, everyday man working through life. Right? God sent him as a prophet, because God can use anybody, as a prophet to Israel to tell them, here's what's wrong with you. Here's what's wrong. You need to fix this. He used his life as the lesson so he could empathize with God to be able to share that message. And now he's judging the priests because the priests weren't doing it. The religious leaders. I don't know how many of y'all have seen these stories lately, but I think I can count on at least 3 or 4 times in the past month and a half where there has been these religious leaders in churches. Don't know what denominations, maybe they're independent, maybe they're Baptist, maybe they're Methodist or whatever, but there's been these leaders who have been leaders in their churches for years, decades. And all of a sudden they're coming out and they're stepping down from their positions because of past transgressions that were never admitted. You know, moral failure in our religious leaders leads to moral failure in our churches. Moral failure in our religious leaders, and when I say religious leaders, I'm not just talking about the priests, I'm talking about the fathers and mothers at home, leads to moral failure of our children. And what he's saying here is my priests have morally failed my people. They have a responsibility here. We as individuals, the people of Israel had a responsibility as individuals to serve the Lord, but the religious leaders have a responsibility. So the failure of the priests is called out in verses 4 through 6. Verses 7 through 10. As they were increased, so they sinned against me, therefore will I change their glory into shame. They eat up the sin of my people, and they set their heart on their iniquity, and there shall be like people, like priests, and I will punish them for their ways, and reward them their doings. For they shall eat and not have enough. They shall commit whoredom and shall not increase, because they have left off to take heed of the Lord. So God pronounces the judgment, the punishment. You've sinned, starting in verse 7. As they were increased, they sinned against me. As they became more prosperous, they turned further and further away from me and went into their sin. So guess what? That prosperity, he calls it glory, that what they've earned is going to become shame. Shameful. Something we've earned from sin is not pleasing to God. It is not a blessing to God. It is a shame, right? Now, it's probably a pretty simple example, but someone who robs a bank and gets away with $1 million. Yeah, they're $1 million richer, but that's a sin. Just because they prospered from it does not mean it's pleasing to God. And that's what he's saying here is, yeah, you've prospered, you've prospered more and more, but you didn't do it with me. You didn't do it with me controlling it. You prospered, and that's a shame on you, because what's more important to God is us serving Him than what riches we get in our life. He'll bless us. You know, I know there's blessings in my life from serving Him, and I think there's blessing in everyone else's life from serving Him. But there are those things that sometimes we get that are not a blessing of God, and they're really shameful, right? So he's saying here, everything you've got is a shame to me. They eat up the sin of my people, and they set their heart on their iniquity, so they're pretty much turned to that life without God. And there shall be like people, like priests, I will punish them in their ways. It doesn't matter if you're the religious leader or you're the individual there. He's going to punish them. For they shall eat and not have enough. I'm so thankful that we live in a country where if I'm hungry, I can go to the store and buy whatever I need to eat, right? That's how they work. They wanted nothing, and now he's going to, his punishment on them is they're not going to get enough. Okay? Their lives are about to change. They shall not increase, so the prosperity they have is going away because they have left off to take heed of the Lord. God is punishing them because they are no longer serving Him and acknowledging Him and recognizing Him for who He is. Then 11 to 14, there's another charge in here. Whoredom and wine and new wine take away the heart. My people ask counsel at their stocks, and their staff declareth unto them, for the spirit of the whoredom has caused them to err. They have gone a-whoring from under their God. They sacrifice unto the tops of mountains and burn incense upon the hills, under the oaks and the poplars and the elms, because the shadow thereof is good. Therefore your daughters shall commit whoredom, and your spouses shall commit adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they commit whoredom, nor your spouses when they commit adultery. For themselves are separated with whores, and they sacrifice with harlots. Therefore the people that doth not understand shall fall. This is talking about the people's idolatry. So it's not just they turned away from God. As we mentioned earlier, they've turned toward idols, false gods. You know, when it talks about sacrificing on the mountaintops and burning incense on the hills and under the oaks and the poplars and elms, none of that is in God's plan for the Hebrew people. That is not how God wanted them to worship Him. So they're not worshiping God, right? They're worshiping the pagan gods of the countries around them. Why did Israel have a king? I remember. Because they wanted to be like the nations around them. Yeah. At that time, God provided judges to them in times of need, but they really, the only leader of the Hebrew people before Saul was crowned king was God. He'd raised judges to help them in times of trouble, to lead them out of times of trouble. He raised priests to take care of their spiritual needs and make sure they were following God. And then people said, we want to be like the nations around us. We need a king. And God told them, He warned them through Samuel that if you want a king, you're going to be like the other nations, and you're going to have to deal with what the other nations deal, and that king is going to enslave your children. He's going to take your fields. He's going to take things from you. And we know, even though David was a king, was a man after God's own heart, he wasn't perfect. Saul wasn't perfect. Solomon, probably one of the greatest kings of Israel and growth in Israel, was far from perfect. And they dealt with everything from the king. Well, the other thing they got to be like the other nations was these false gods and these idols coming, and they were worshiping their gods. And so he said, your idolatry and your spiritual adultery, because that's what it was. They weren't serving God. They weren't paying attention and serving these other gods. Will lead to your downfall. It'll lead to your moral decay. And there's a verse here where it talks about the daughters and the sons, but it says not punishing the daughters when they commit this, or the spouses. They're still going to suffer, but he's putting the blame on the people who led them here. Right? The priests, the leaders, the heads of the household. Right? It's hard, as a parent, I am so thankful that my children are in church. But I look at the rest of my family. My grandmother. The reason I am saved is not because of my aunt and uncle raised me. It's not because of my parents, because they died when I was younger, right? My grandmother prayed for me and dragged me to church, and that built a foundation for me. So ultimately, in the end, we as parents, we have the responsibility for the spiritual well-being of our children. And what he's saying here is he's putting the blame on those that led this nation down the path. And we're getting short on time here. So I'll finish 15 to 18, but I do want to close with one application here. And it's where we are. When I say as a people, as a nation, right? We as a nation are kind of in the same path when it comes to where Israel was at this time. Right? Israel at this time, moral decay, spiritual decay. We as a country are the same thing. So I go back to what I said a little while ago. I don't think I finished the thought, but if you go back and look, there's been points where these spiritual leaders who have been serving for decades, out of the blue, come out and they resign their positions, which they should. But there is moral decay, moral fallings in their lives, and they've been leading other people. So we'll finish chapter 4 and 5 next time I'm here. I'm going to be gone the next few weeks, so it'll be a while, probably several weeks before we get back into it. But we'll go ahead and close in prayer. Dear Lord, I thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you for just the opportunity to be here. I thank you for those who are here, Lord. And Lord, again, I thank you for your salvation. I ask that you just continue to bless this church, Lord, and bless the services. Follow in your son's name.